Imagine this. For decades, the world called Filipinos helpers. But tonight, we expose how that word hid immense power. From domestic workers to prime ministers, from caregivers to CEOs, Filipinos have been transforming behind invisible walls. We'll reveal the moments when the servant lifted the world. If you believe Filipinos belong at the top, hit like, subscribe, and type leader in the comments. They call us helpers. They think of Filipinos as the smiling housemaid, the nighttime nurse, the caregiver who never complains, noble service, but always in the shadows. But what if I told you that the helper label was never just about service? It was also about containment. For centuries, the world built a box for Filipinos. You help, do not decide. You lift, don't lead. Tonight, we open that box. The story begins in colonial halls and missionary schools where Filipinos were taught humility as virtue. The servant role was elevated as morality. To help others was deeply Filipino. But external forces reinforced it. The markets demanded care work. Immigration policies categorized us as helpers, not professionals. Over time, that narrative took root deep in hearts. So when Filipinos left home for work abroad, many accepted helper rules as destiny, not limitation. In the 1980s and 1990s, the world saw Filipino domestic workers in Hong Kong, Singapore, the Gulf. They were helpers in the literal sense, yet they carried remittances that held economies together. They became pillars of households, paying for schooling, infrastructure, health. But they themselves remained off-stage in media, rarely spotlighted beyond sacrifice. The helper image persisted because no one challenged it. Here's the first dramatic reveal. This servant image masked an engine. The world depended on Filipino helpers so deeply that entire hospitals, logistics systems, even households would collapse if we left. Yet no one dared utter that truth. The helper was comfortable, non-threatening, invisible, and in invisibility lay safety. But that safety became a cage. Take Lourdes, a domestic helper in Riyadh in the 1990s who sent money home, raised her siblings, and then secretly studied nursing courses on off days. When she finally obtained her license, she became a nurse in a hospital instead of a household. In that moment, she shattered two narratives at once. The world saw her as a caregiver again, but she carried self-belief that she could heal. That shift from helper to healer is the first step toward leadership. Then comes the dramatic shock. The suitcase with her credentials was delayed by months at the embassy. Somebody questioned her paperwork, threatened deportation. She picked up her phone, called home, whispered, "They don't want me to lead." But she persisted. When she finally got into the hospital, her first day didn't see cheers, it saw skepticism. Colleagues assumed she was temporary. Supervisors treated her as subservient. She had to prove more than everyone else. But she did. She rose. The helper legacy inflicted a double burden, to serve and to prove worth. Every Filipino stepping out from that role must carry a hidden weight, that all their leadership must justify itself twice over. Because helping is expected, leading is questioned. So many Filipinos never dare the transition, not for fear of failure, but fear of rejection. World leaders rarely acknowledge that the same humility, discipline, adaptability, and cross-cultural empathy that made Filipinos ideal helpers also make them ideal leaders. When you work in multiple homes, speak broken accents, cross borders, translate languages, heal unknown patients, you acquire skills no textbook can teach. That is the secret leadership curriculum hidden behind the servant mask. But there is a seismic shift now. In the last decade, Filipino help roles began to fracture outward. Overseas nurses demanded leadership paths. Seafarers became shipping company captains. Caregivers founded home care firms. BPO agents became department heads in Silicon Valley. The ripple starts with one person saying, "I won't just help, I will head." And that statement is dangerous because it threatens the old narrative. Tonight's first segment ends with the challenge, whether we accept the helper label or fight it. Because if you remain the helper in your mind, the world will never see you as leader. But if you step beyond service into vision, suddenly that label is broken. And the question becomes, who among us will be the first to lead? Comment leader if you believe the time of Filipino helpers must end and that we step into heads now. Keep that in your heart as we move to segment 2, where we dive into the fight, the sabotage, the roadblocks, and the moments when a Filipino defied every limit and ascended. When you've been called a helper long enough, you start to believe that leadership belongs to someone else. But then, someone stands up, someone refuses to apologize for being good, and suddenly the ceiling cracks. Across continents, a silent uprising has begun. From hospitals to boardrooms, Filipinos are no longer whispering gratitude, they're rewriting hierarchy. The world just didn't notice yet. Let's start in London. Inside St. Thomas Hospital, nurse Marivich Cruz, once a ward assistant from Pampanga, now leads an entire ICU division. 15 years ago, she was told, Filipinos make great carers, but they're too soft for leadership. Last year, she received the Royal College of Nursing Leadership Award. Her secret, empathy as strategy. When COVID hit, her unit's survival rate became the highest in the hospital. The British press called it a miracle. She called it trabaho lang po ito, just work. But that humility hid a revolution, a Filipina who used compassion as command. That's the first shock. What the world misreads as obedience is often tactical patience. Filipinos don't rush to take credit. They earn trust until no one can deny them the seat. They lead from the back until the front becomes inevitable. In Japan, Filipino engineers in the robotics sector started as line operators. Now, Rabano Santos, a graduate from Batangas State University, oversees a 300-person automation plant outside Nagoya. His team builds robotic arms used in Tesla factories. The Japanese call him sensei of precision, yet he still eats packed lunches with his team. That's the Filipino paradox, authority without arrogance. But let's not sugarcoat it. The climb was brutal. Many leaders, like Ramon, were told they'd never be promoted because they fit better in follow-up roles. Others faced contract limits, language barriers, even racism. One manager once whispered, "Your accent won't command respect." He learned later that results speak louder than vowels. When that manager resigned, guess who replaced him? The man he dismissed. This is where the drama deepens. Every Filipino who ascends must battle an invisible stereotype that kindness can't lead, that gentleness can't govern. Yet again and again, they prove the opposite. They turn compassion into competence. In Dubai, Clarista Guzman began as a hotel cleaner. 2 decades later, she's the general manager of an international 5-star resort chain. Her first managerial meeting? Silence. No one looked at her. Then she presented her numbers, the highest customer satisfaction rating in the company's history. The CEO asked her secret. She said, "We serve with dignity, not submission." That line spread through hospitality circles like wildfire. But here's the emotional punch. For every Clarice, there are thousands still stuck in helper contracts despite degrees and experience. Filipino teachers abroad working as nannies, engineers working as drivers. The waste is global, not Filipino. Countries that call themselves advanced are blind to the gold they already have. The IMF estimates that $100 billion, 0 cents USD, in global productivity is lost yearly due to skill mismatch among migrant workers. Filipinos form the largest underutilized segment. The world is literally underpaying its leaders. Now watch the second shock unfold. That's changing fast. Nations facing labor shortages are realizing they need not just workers, but managers who can connect cultures. Guess which nationality is fluent in empathy, discipline, and English? Exactly. Japan, Canada, and Germany are launching new leadership pathways for Filipino migrants. The same people once called helpers are now being fast-tracked into supervisory and executive training. The UK's National Health Service now has a Filipino nurses board advising policy. An idea unthinkable 10 years ago. The helper became the voice. Still, each victory hides a personal story of grit. Mark Valderrama, an OFW mechanic in Qatar, was promoted to lead safety officer after preventing a site explosion. His manager later said, "You didn't follow procedure." Mark replied, "No, sir, I followed instinct to protect life." That moment transformed the company's safety protocol. He now trains multinational teams. And this pattern repeats everywhere. Filipino leadership is expanding not through aggression, but through earned respect. It's stealth leadership. You only realize they're in charge when everything runs right. But here's where the story catches fire. Some global firms are now studying the Filipino management model. Harvard Business Review recently cited it: relational leadership, high accountability combined with emotional intelligence. Corporations are hiring Filipinos not just for tasks, but for team culture. The helper has become the template. Still, at home, many Filipinos hesitate to own that power. Decades of modesty taught us not to brag, but silence no longer serves. The world needs to hear the story of every overseas leader who fought invisibility, because every promotion earned abroad chips away at centuries of stereotype. So here's the bigger revelation. The helper was never a role. It was a stage, a chapter, not the book. Filipinos mastered service, then rewrote it into stewardship. The rest of the world is finally reading along. And now, as AI replaces mechanical jobs and empathy becomes the rarest skill, the Filipino advantage turns unstoppable. The world trained machines to calculate. Filipinos were trained to care and lead. And that is the future every economy needs. But the ceiling didn't just crack, it's collapsing. And beneath it stands the very people the world once called helpers. Now they're directors, commanders, innovators. Comment rise if you believe the time of Filipino leaders has come. We move to the final transformation when Filipinos no longer have to prove they can lead abroad because the world will look to the Philippines for leadership itself. Once, the Filipino dream was to serve abroad. Now, the world dreams of hiring Filipinos to lead. What began as quiet labor has become a global movement of leadership, compassion, and cultural power, and the world is finally starting to admit it. Across the Pacific, at a corporate tower in Toronto, the vice president of operations at a major logistics firm is a woman from Quezon City, Anna Lazo. She started as a call center agent in Makati, handling overseas accounts. When she migrated to Canada, she entered the same industry, this time as an assistant. Within 7 years, she was leading 3,000 employees across North America. Her motto, "We used to follow orders, now we write them with kindness." That's the first shock. Filipino leadership doesn't mirror Western leadership. It's not loud, not built on ego or domination. It's quiet, strategic, human. Harvard sociologists now refer to it as relational leadership, the ability to motivate through empathy rather than fear. Multinationals like Accenture, Amazon, and JP Morgan now actively recruit Filipinos for managerial and team lead roles because data shows their teams score 40% higher on morale and retention. And that's no coincidence. The same traits once dismissed as servant qualities, humility, patience, adaptability, have become the most valuable leadership skills in the age of burnout and automation. When the pandemic revealed the fragility of human systems, Filipino workers became the glue holding institutions together. Now that the world has seen that, the paradigm is shifting. The helper is now the head, because leadership built on care outlasts leadership built on control. But here's a second shock. While Filipinos are ascending abroad, the real revolution is happening back home. Across Metro Manila and Cebu, a new generation of leaders is emerging. CEOs under 40 who were once OFW kids. They grew up watching their parents sacrifice abroad, sending remittances, working double shifts. Now, they're turning that pain into innovation. In the tech corridors of Bonifacio Global City, Innovantage, a Filipino-founded AI company, now provides automation systems to firms in Singapore, Australia, and the UK. Its founder, the son of a former domestic worker in Bahrain. When asked about his company's mission, he said, "My mother cleaned offices so I could build one." That's the Filipino story. In a single line, humble beginnings becoming history-making results. Meanwhile, in Dubai, Filipino entrepreneurs are rewriting economics. There are now over 900 Filipino-owned businesses registered in the UAE. From construction consultancies to restaurant chains, the Philippine Business Council says Filipino-led firms now employ more than 45,000 workers in the region. That's not servitude, that's sovereignty. Here's the third shock. Global think tanks now call the Philippines a leadership incubator nation because when workers go abroad and return, they bring back not just money, but management philosophies, technical skills, and cross-cultural intelligence. Japan's Labor Bureau projects that by 2035, more than 2 million Filipino professionals will hold supervisory positions across Asia. The helper narrative dead on arrival. But let's step back. The transformation wasn't gifted, it was earned. Every promotion abroad carried the ghosts of stereotypes. Every success back home battled corruption and inequality. Filipino leadership rose not because the world allowed it, but because the world needed it. When the dust settled from every crisis, financial, medical, or natural, the ones still standing were the same people the world underestimated. That's why this moment feels historic. For decades, Filipinos defined themselves through survival. Now, they're defining the future. Look at global institutions. Filipino-British nurse May Parsons administered the world's first COVID vaccine. Dr. Gerardo Legaspi led the Philippines' first successful brainstem surgery. Maria Ressa stood against disinformation and won a Nobel Peace Prize. Each story dismantles the idea that Filipinos only support. They lead, they innovate, they stand at the front. And yet, beneath the triumph lies a question we can't ignore. Will the Philippines itself be ready to follow its own people's example? Because the ultimate leadership test isn't abroad, it's back home. The same empathy that makes Filipinos beloved abroad must now rebuild the systems that drove them away. Leadership must become legacy. Imagine this, a Philippines where returning OFWs head universities, hospitals, and startups, where leadership training is not imported from Harvard, but modeled after the resilience of our barangay volunteers and our nurses abroad, where the phrase Pinoy pride isn't just emotion, it's a blueprint for governance. That's the future on the horizon, and it's closer than we think. Because when the world looks for leaders who can unite instead of divide, heal instead of harm, the Filipino face will be there, calm, smiling, ready, not as a helper anymore, but as a head with heart. So let this be the declaration: the era of the golden servant is over, the era of the global Filipino leader has begun. And when that leader rises, he carries not just his own dream, but the entire nation's dignity. From domestic helper to director, from migrant to minister, from invisible to indispensable. The next decade will not just remember Filipino resilience, it will follow Filipino leadership. Because the truth is this, you can't suppress a people who lead through love. That's not weakness, that's revolution. Comment vision if you believe this is the decade when Filipinos stop serving the world and start leading it.